There's hope yet for the old House of Mouse, with a hotly anticipated Hollywood movie which is an adaptation of a Broadway musical based on a series of fan fiction books based on a film from 1939 based on a book from 1900. And with that, our project today is going to be The Fall of Elphaba. But, gross. We'll begin today with the skull and the future half-face. I'm unsure as to why, but I always like to start with the head on my sculpts. Kinda feels like a first date. Exposed collarbone behaviour needs to be earned through humble courting and the promise of a generous dowry. You can see that I've simply poked and rolled in two divots for eye sockets and designated a zone for the sniffing holes. I then added the maxilla and removed any excess clay from the rear of the skull. Next, to build up the profile, I'll add in the eyebrow support bars and blend them in with a combination of ball stylus and a silicone shaper. For the teeth, as opposed to the usual pre-baking, I'll opt to impress the pearly whites into the skull given the scale, and the risk of breaking and looking a little bit inbred. I can add the nasal bone for some realistic depth by means of pressing a small ball of clay where the nose would be, and hollowing out said non-existent nose. And for the final touches, I will add a couple of slits to the underside of the skull so that I may surgically add a lower mandible forthwith. Just before baking, I'll give it a once over with a stiff nylon brush and some isopropyl alcohol. I have for said mandible coiled two pieces of wire together using my trusty drill and some very sophisticated tools. I bend into position, apply a layer of bacon bond and build up the structure with slippy, gluey fingers. Now I do need a bit of conditioned clay, and luckily I've got a practice skull lying around that I can Darth Vader into deletion and harvest this carcass for what I need. With the mandible now double C thick, I'll impress in an itty bitty bottom row of teetsies and bake. I can then glue everything into position, starting with the lower jaw to the upper jaw and then dropping in a couple of eyes, and then we can move on to the body. If we go back to our concept sketch, we can see that we have one bony arm raised, and that bony arm is going to need a body. So let's make a body. For the base, I'm going to take a bit of steel wire and clip off more than I need, wrap the lower half in aluminium foil to keep the weight low, and just give it an initial layer of clay before I add those sweater puppies. I will of course model these in such a way that my viewers will be asking if I have ever actually seen a real life woman naked before, and who's to say? I can then introduce the clavicles before checking the head position and making an armature for what will eventually be the exposed bony appendage. I'll make the armature out of a single piece of wire for stability, as making the separate humerus, radius and ulna would be fragile and more than likely just break and fail. Like your dreams. What the hell was that? I don't know. Anyway, back to the video. I can take the single piece of wire and bend it at the wrist back to the elbow. I can then clip off the excess and add the sternocleidomastoid muscles to the neck before reviewing this witch who is looking a wee bit chunky than I had planned and needs some celebrity Ozempic treatment. I'll use a scraper to take down the bulk of the body and a blade for the tasty Italian tomato sauce, and I can then pinch the great tits into submission with all the technique of a teenage boy swearing, "I've done this before." With the shape now looking as accurate as I'm willing to work on it, I'll use a variety of shaping and smoothing tools on the main body and add the right arm starting with the general shape, and I can add detail later. One last smoothing with a silicone shaper, and I added nipples just to get a visual aid for myself, which I don't think I can show on YouTube. I don't even know if I could say that on YouTube. Nipples. And then we're onto some wrinkles on the dress, which I'll add with a series of noodly doodads. To see where the folds would lie, I took some selfies in the bathroom mirror. Then I put a shirt on and took some selfies of the fabric folds. To create the illusion of fabric, I press in enough noodles to make it look convincing, and also just as many as my sanity can handle. And then I'll add some gross little pustules. I imagine her skin is bubbling like a gremlin exposed to sunlight.
How is that?
start with a little divot, poke in a little nugget of clay, and then I blend that into the body. I can do this for the shoulder, and then I'll do the same for the front of the neck just a little bit, and I will move on to the back and I'll do the same there. And if you have been into sculpting or you get into sculpting, you would have noticed already, or you will notice in future, that you will spend a lot of time putting detail into places that will mean absolutely nothing in the long run. Much like this, because you'll end up covering it with something else. Like a collar, which we will make forthwith. I'll use a wee acrylic mat and roll out a thin piece of clay that I can cut into size and texturize using my laundry delicates net. A product I still don't fully understand, but have been ensured that we need it. And with the texture imprinted onto the collar, I can wrap it around the neck with a somewhat natural flow, and then add a trim to the forearm guard that I have no idea what it's actually called, but if you know, then leave it down in the comments section. I can then add some seams wherever looks appropriate, and then I'll add some buttonholes for some future buttons, and I'll rip up some fabric on the arm for some reason that I'm sure made sense to Past Keith. Hi everybody, this is Past Keith here. The reason I did this is because I wanted the witch to show more skin. It was for more skin. Thank you, goodbye. Hello again everybody, you're back with Present Keith. Thank you very much for that, Past Keith. And now you can see here that I use my clay extruder to make a plunging neckline, which I think will complement the arm skin quite nicely. And I'll take a little bit of that extruded clay and I will make a series of buttons that I can poke into position with my finger, and then use a ball stylus to poke the buttons a little deeper and give a nice little divot. And finally, before I bake the body, I want to get as much of this texture onto the dress as I can. So I'll use my finger to poke it in, and also a little ball stylus. I'll give it a final wipe down with some isopropyl alcohol and cook it and move on. And with the body baked, it's time to layer up the face. Now, if you need a consistent thickness of clay and you can't afford or don't want to spend the money on a pasta maker, you can roll out a piece of clay atop two objects of equal thickness, like I'm doing here with these dollar store stir sticks. And with this thin piece of clay, we can apply this down to what we're going to call the good side of Elphaba's face. And with my X-Acto blade, I will carve out the mouth and I will carve out the eye. To get the skin to adhere, I'll apply a thin layer of bacon bond, and I'll take a little brush and just make sure that that's applied evenly all over the skull before repositioning the skin mask. Ugh. I'll then remove any of the excess flesh that I have hanging off the side of the face with my scalpel before adding those goopy tendrils that are synonymous with holding things together in horror movies that shouldn't be held together anymore. I will of course be doing all of this behind my thumb, because much as I want people to learn, I need to keep the audience guessing. This is my thigh-high slit in the dress. I can then randomly texture up the skin with a ball stylus, refine the soft clay around the eye that still has an eyelid, and add said eyelids over said eyeball. Now, I had planned on leaving Elphaba noseless, but she looked a little too skeletal, so I opted to add a nose. Well, half a nose, which in my mind is 50% more than fellow magical malcontent Voldemort, so, you know, a win is a win. And now, after admiring both sides of this absolutely beautiful lady, we could take a nitrile glove and some bacon bond, dab it, bake it. The idea behind the nitrile glove is that the fingertips are actually a little textured, and if you cover it in bacon bond, then hopefully you'll imprint that little bit of texture on the skin, giving it a little bit of texture once baked. Oh, and I also made a hat. Here's a hat. Looks like the sorting hat, but it's not. It's just a witch's hat. No magical properties here. Now that I've baked the head and the body and they're properly saved, we can move on to the exposed bony arm, which being the most fragile, I wanted to save this till the end. What I'll do here is I'll build up the structure with more clay than I actually need, with the intention of cutting away the excess and refining each individual bone shape with my favorite shaping tool, the Black Falcon. You can see here that I'm taking the single piece of clay and just using the tool to separate the individual bones. We have the two in the forearm, which are the radius and the ulna, and they connect back to your bicep tricep bone called the humerus. Fun fact, that's how the funny bone got its name, because it's a nerve connected to the humerus. Now, for the most fragile part of this entire project, which is going to be these spindly fingers, I will cut 5 fingers to size so that I can roll to a pointy tip, and then add in the sections by rolling a scale ruler over the knuckles and then using a shaper to slightly curve the bone shape in the center. It's a bit cartoony, but it looks good, gets the job done. To make the bones of the palm of the hand, I squished together a series of clay balls of varying sizes, which worked a lot better than if you tried to carve the shape into a single piece, as it looks more natural and does all the sides at once. To give the fingers something to adhere to, I'll add some metal wires that act like supports for the fingers to cantilever off. I can add the hand to the arm, and before adding the fingers, I'll add some porous bony texture by use of a stiff nylon brush. I'll just stab that up and down the arm, and that should be able to take a bit of paint later to give us some nice natural shading. I will from here very gingerly add the fingers with as little deformation as I can manage before realizing that this is indeed a right hand on a left arm. Shit. Well, you know, I guess that's a problem for past Keith to sort out. Which, being voiceover Keith from the future, I know he did. Yay! Good job, Keith. Thanks, Keith. For the painting, we will need our primer, a black and a white, the midtones, the main skin tone, fleshy tones, and a couple extras. To start, I gave Elphaba an undercoat, a primer. Sorry, the rabbits have got the zoomies. They're distracting me. Anyway. Bear, calm down. Where was I? Yeah, there's a green hand now. I might leave this in. Anyway, we are professionals. We are professionals here. Professionals. So you can see here that I'm actually mixing paints with a tip that I picked up from Ninjon on YouTube. You take your base color and then you add in either a lighter shade or a darker shade, and you stick the nozzle right into a sponge and then hit the go button, and the air will go back into the bottle and mix the paints. And use the same technique to clean it as well with water. Just add water, do the sponge thing, and then pour it out until the water runs clear. And while I explained all that, I did the shadows and I did the highlights. I used the scalpel to put in some cranial sutures, and then I went back over the overspray with a bone white on all the bony areas. I also glued the arm into the correct position, I relocated the thumb to where it should be, and I painted the eyes white and painted the buttons and the neckline in a nice glossy silver. I then use a squid pink on the fleshy bits and dry brush the tendrils to convey structural integrity of flesh has been compromised. For the exposed bone on the arm, I'm going to make a simple wash out of a leather brown and a water, and I'm going to start heavy on the hand and just let gravity do its thing with a little bit of help from me, and just seep into all the pores and cracks that we made earlier with that nylon brush. I'll just leave that to dry. The dress, I'm going to use a stone grey to pick up the raised edges and pass over the model with some light dry brushing. And for the final touches to it, I'll then apply edge highlighting to the most raised sections with a slightly lighter grey bordering on white. The caterpillar-esque eyebrows will be painted black before I turn my attention to the bones once more, for what I'm hoping is a final dry brush and edge highlights to the skull's raised edges, and then I can finish off the teeth, just making them a little lighter than the rest of the bony areas, try to highlight them. Later on we're going to be dealing with some goop. So I've opted to keep the base simple and painted a simple 100 by 100mm MDF block white and glued Elphaba into place. She is, however, looking a bit bald, and we need to give this green queen the glamorous locks befitting her stature. For said hair, I'll unravel a length of twine and paint it with a heavily watered down black acrylic. I can leave it to dry overnight and glue the strands to the scalp, starting with the bottom and working in overlapping layers. And with the hair in place, we need to make some goop. And that is something I never thought I'd say, but here we are, together. This is a 2-part liquid epoxy resin that you can buy off the shelf at any hardware store. Me being the kind of guy who still thinks that I need a male adult present when I go into a hardware store, needed to test drive this on my buddy here, Frank. And with the overnight test on Frank a success, I think we can go ahead and mix us up a big melting pot for Elphaba. I'll mix in the tiniest amount of paint with a lot of resin and then start pooling it on, and as you can see, I just lift it up and tilt it and let gravity do its thing. Just wanted it to look as messy as we could make it look and really sell that I'm melting effect. Get a little on a stir stick, start slapping it onto the arm and the face because I wanted her to be looking at that hand in shock. She's melting. And for one of the final touches, I'll add the detail to the eye, which I will have my camera on for, but it will not be recording. But luckily I noticed it before I added the bloodshotness, and I had a little bit extra on the brush, so I applied this around the skull to give it a little bit of a I'm in pain. This is happening now kind of feel. And as I'm feeling extra generous today, Elphaba will get a little bit of UV resin to make that nose and eyes shiny, and then she gets her hat, and I think that we are ready for some final images, guys. Enjoy! Big ol' thank you for hanging around for this one. I had a lot of fun trying new things and just making a mess, playing with Goop. Please do like the video if you did in fact like it, leave a comment, let me know if you've seen Wicked yet, the stage show or the movie, and let me know if you enjoyed it. Like the video, share, subscribe, leave a comment of what you might like to see me make next. Share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and until next time, go make a mess.